Colonel Johnston's army stirs at Camp Scott as the snows of Wyoming continue to fall. The Bocock sisters and Charles live in the wagon that once carried the sisters across the plains, still parked in Immigrant Square, crowded among strangers. The noose of the Reformation tightens. From every pulpit the command echoes. Plural marriage is celestial law, the path to salvation. It's your duty to build Zion. Will the army's long stalemate crack under spring's weight? Hannah and Elizabeth, sealed to Charles, cling to their fragile circle and listen for word from the north. Will the army come? Will the torch be lit? Will Zion burn? Welcome back to Zion's Fire, an American saga of pioneer dreams ensnared in polygamous knots, theocratic defiance and quiet endurance as federal troops prepare to march, and the cost of belonging in Zion reaches its breaking point. I'm Debbie Pedersen. Join me as we follow the Bocock sisters through the final months of the siege. This is episode 7, The End of the Storm. Frozen stalemate. Camp Scott is a miserable cluster of log huts, tents, and dugouts carved into the snow near the burnt-out ruins of Fort Bridger. Colonel Johnston's army endured the kind of winter that kills quietly. Deep snowdrifts bury supply wagons. Temperatures plunge below zero for weeks at a time. Frostbite blackens fingers and toes. Men wrap rags around stumps where toes were amputated. Scurvy loosens teeth and turns gums black. Horses and mules, already weakened by the long march and the Mormon raids, drop dead by the dozens, their frozen carcasses hacked apart for whatever meat could be salvaged. Lot Smith's torching of the supply trains the previous October still haunts the Army. 74 wagons gone, 1,400 head of cattle scattered into the wilderness. What remains of the Army's supplies is rationed tightly. Desertions tick upward as Army morale plummets. No advance into Utah is possible. Johnston knows it. Keeping the 2nd Dragoons and infantry in defense lines, he sends out scouts to watch the Mormon pickets in Echo Canyon. He waits for spring. Orders are clear. Hold position, maintain readiness, prepare for a campaign when the trail's clear. Reinforcements and fresh supplies are promised, but winter has its own timetable. While the men at Camp Scott wait for spring, far to the east in Washington, President Buchanan feels the political ground shifting beneath him. The Utah expedition, already mocked in newspapers as Buchanan's blunder, has cost millions and delivered nothing but frozen men and burnt wagons. Congress grumbles amid the looming crisis over slavery, drawing attention away from the distant Mormon rebellion. In late February, Buchanan acts. He appoints 2 peace commissioners, Major Benjamin McCulloch and Kentucky Senator-elect Lazarus Powell, to travel west with an offer to Brigham. The message is blunt. Submit to federal authority. Accept the new governor. Allow the Army to enter peacefully, and all prior sedition and treasons will be pardoned. No one in Camp Scott knows about the commissioners or the offer. They only know the snow keeps falling, the scurvy keeps spreading, and Utah still lays beyond the horizon, silent, defiant, and unreachable. An urgency. In Salt Lake City, there are whispered stories among the immigrants. Young women counseled by bishops to enter plural marriage with older men, then sent to colonize remote outposts, Bear Lake, San Pete, or the southern settlements, never seen again by their families. Brigham and other leaders preach plural marriage is a divine command to raise up seed unto the Lord and strengthen the frontiers. Single converts, especially young ones with no parents to protect them, are prime candidates. Refusal could mean being labeled unfaithful, losing ward's support, or facing assignment far from the center of Zion. Hannah and Elizabeth cannot bear the thought of losing Emma. With no money and no passage back to England, the only power they have left is to keep Emma close, in their wagon, in their tent, in their circle. Marrying her to Charles, the man they know and trust, is the only way to prevent her from being sealed to a stranger and possibly sent away forever. Then came the added fear that tipped the balance. By late March 1858, the army at Camp Scott is stirring. Mormon scouts bring word of melting snow, reinforcements arriving, and Johnston preparing to march. Invasion feels imminent. Sermons grow sharper. Prepare to burn everything. Be ready to flee south. Stand ready to die for Zion. If the soldiers come, if cannon fire tears through the city, what happens to an unsealed soul caught in the crossfire? For Emma, 14 and still reeling from the frozen siege, plural marriage now carries eternal weight. What if death comes before she enters the celestial law? What if she dies without the sealing that promises salvation? The Reformation's pressure had been building for months. Ward meetings, private interviews, the constant counsel to marry now, build the kingdom, fulfill the celestial law. But it's now the shadow of the approaching army that makes it feel essential to Emma. As a young, pretty, orphaned English convert, Emma is exactly the kind of vulnerable newcomer leaders choose. Bishops and ward teachers press her in quiet conversations to marry now. Emma is a prime candidate for assignment to an older man or a settler in a remote southern settlement. Hannah and Elizabeth, seeing the storm gather, cannot leave it to chance, cannot lose Emma to the frontier, cannot allow her to be assigned to an older man. So in late March, Emma is sealed to Charles' law for time and eternity in the Endowment House. No celebration, no flowers, just solemn words echoing in the adobe room, binding her fate to the family's fragile circle. Emma is sealed, safe for now, protected from separation, from the frontier, from an unsealed death if the army should come. The price is paid. Brigham's final gambit. While Johnston's army shivers in place at Camp Scott, Brigham Young turns Salt Lake City into a ghost town. By March 1858, the decision is made. If the troops advance, northern Utah will be abandoned. The saints will scorch the earth and flee south rather than surrender. Brigham Young calls it the move south, a mass evacuation that begins quietly at first, then accelerates into one of the largest organized migrations in American history. In the tabernacle on March 21st, he stands before thousands and delivers the order. We will not suffer them to come here to destroy us. We will lay waste to the country before them. Homes, barns, fields, orchards, Everything built over a decade is to be prepared to burn. The saints are instructed to be ready to flee if the army crosses the passes. Women sew extra clothing. Men sharpen axes and rifles. Children are taught to keep quiet and move quickly. The exodus begins in earnest in April. Families loaded wagons with what they could carry: beds, stoves, spinning wheels, children, and start south towards Provo, Spanish Fork, Payson, and beyond. Estimates vary, but 30,000 or more people left their homes. Salt Lake City's streets are emptied. Houses stand silent. The temple block, still under construction, is left unguarded except for a few watchmen. Brigham moves his own household to Provo, but never stops directing the defense. From the Lion House and later from Provo, he sends express riders north with orders. Keep the Echo Canyon fortifications manned. Keep the Nauvoo Legion ready to roll boulders and flood the road. Keep the scouts watching Camp Scott. He authorizes enough grain and ammunition stored in the canyons to sustain a guerrilla war if needed. Yet, even as he preaches total resistance and is moving his people south, he listens to the back-channel messages from Thomas L. Kane, the non-Mormon mediator who wintered in Utah. Kane urges Brigham to accept Buchanan's terms. Let Alfred Cumming take the governorship. Let the army enter peacefully, and the treason indictments will go away. Brigham's sermons remain defiant, but privately he prepares for peace on his terms. The move south bought time to negotiate, time to show the world the saints would rather burn their homes than bow, time to force the federal government to back down. By late spring, Salt Lake City was nearly deserted. The streets echoed with wind and the occasional patrol. The saints wait in Provo and in the southern settlements, wondering if the army will come and if Brigham will give the order to light the torch. This is the moment when Zion held its breath. The march through a ghost city. The morning is June 26, 1858. The streets of Salt Lake City are silent. The city that once rung with hammers, hymns, and the shouts of children building Zion is now a ghost town. Houses stand empty, shutters closed, doors unlocked. Every home is prepared for the torch. Furniture stacked, hay piled in corners, kindling ready. The saints move south with discipline. Tens of thousands already in Provo, Spanish Fork, and other southern settlements. Only a handful of watchmen and a few armed men remain behind to light the torch if Brigham gives the word. Then the sound they dreaded for months, the slow, steady tromp of boots and the creak of artillery wheels. Johnston's army marching down the wide main street. The 2nd Dragoons leading the column, sabers gleaming in the summer sun. Infantry follow, rifles shouldered, faces sunburnt and gaunt from the long winter at Camp Scott. Behind them rolls the wagons, the cannons, the supply trains that survived the raids and the snow. They pass the empty tabernacle, the unfinished temple block, the Lion House, where Brigham held council. Not a single resident stands on the sidewalks to watch. No stones are thrown, no shots fired. Johnston gives strict orders. The troops are to march through and continue south to a new post, Camp Floyd, 40 miles southwest near Cedar Fort. They obeyed. The column moved steadily, disciplined, almost eerily quiet except for the jingle of harness and the thud of boots on packed earth. By late afternoon, the last wagon clears the city. Salt Lake City remains standing. No fires are lit. Brigham never gives the order. The war that had never quite become a war was over. Brigham receives word from scouts. He listens in silence, then turns to his counselors. They have come, and they have not harmed us. The army marched through Salt Lake City, and Zion did not burn. Johnston's troops passed like shadows, continued south to Camp Floyd, and the war slipped quietly into history. In Springville, the Bocock sisters waited. Hannah, Elizabeth, and Emma, now all sealed to Charles, came south with the refugees. The wagon that once carried them across the plains was parked among the borrowed fields and borrowed roofs. The immediate danger is past. No cannons, no fire, no invasion. But the deeper pressures remained. The Reformation's demands did not vanish with the army's departure. The sealings that had bound them together in haste, Hannah first, Elizabeth in January, and Emma in the final weeks before the move south, were eternal promises made under fear of separation, fear of assignment, fear of death unsealed. They had kept Emma close. They had kept their little family intact. But the cost was etched into every day that followed. The cramped quarters, the rationed food, the lingering weight of obedience in a world that had asked everything and given little in return. Emma, still only 14, carries her new eternal bond quietly. Hannah and Elizabeth carried the memory of the nights they had listened to patrols ride past, wondering if the next day would bring soldiers or salvation. Charles carried his tools, his dwindling leather, his place among them. The war over, Zion endured. But for the Bocock sisters, the quiet cost of belonging would follow them still, through Springville poverty, through remarriages after Charles's early death, through the years when plural marriage itself would fade from divine command to just a memory. This is the storm they entered. This is the life they built from the ashes of paradise promised. This is Zion's Fire, Episode 7, The End of the Storm. Elizabeth Bocock is my husband's great-great-grandmother. If you've enjoyed this series about the Bocock sisters, please hit subscribe and the bell so you don't miss upcoming videos and new series. Post-show notes are coming right up. Don't move. Welcome to the post-show notes. Okay, one of the most striking things about the Army's entry into Salt Lake is how quietly and peacefully it all went down. Okay, did you notice that the saints left their homes unlocked? No barricades, no armed resistance. Okay, this was done deliberately. Brigham had instructed his people to prepare to burn everything. That's why there's straw and hay in the corners. Everything's all set up to burn. But also to leave the city intact as a statement of trust. We're not savages. We are not afraid to let you see our homes. It was a quiet act of faith that the troops would honor the rules of civilized war. On the other hand, Colonel Johnston issued strict orders: no pillaging, no destruction, no ransacking the city in any way. Okay, his men were to march through in disciplined formation and continue on to Camp Floyd. They obeyed. That's quite impressive considering the horrible winter that these troops just lived through at the hands of the Nauvoo Legion and the guerrilla warfare. For months, the rhetoric had been apocalyptic. Brigham had been promising to leave the troops' bones bleached on the mountains, and Johnston had declared the Mormons just flat-out enemies. Yet when the moment came, both sides stepped back from the brink. No shots, no torches, just the steady tromp of boots through the empty streets. It's one of those rare moments in American history of deep, very deep animosity, high stakes, and yet mutual restraint. The war ended not with a battle, but with silence. And a lot of that can be attributed to Thomas L. Kane and his negotiations between everybody. Okay, this is why the Bocock sisters' story matters so much. Amid all the grand maneuvers and proclamations, it was the ordinary people, the immigrants, the refugees, the young women sealed under pressure who carried the real weight of those uncertain days. They endured the waiting, the fear, and the cost of belonging, and they kept going. The Bocock sisters' later lives. The Utah War ended peacefully in June 1858. But for Hannah, Elizabeth, and Emma, the deeper pressures, the ceilings made in fear, the cost of staying together, followed them south to Springville, which is where they located. Charles built a modest home for his wives and children. He fathered children with all three sisters and worked tirelessly to provide for them. He and Emma's oldest son, Francis Joseph Law, later remembered him as the most energetic man that had ever lived. Charles took an active part in Springville's church and community life until his health failed, which I'm just going to say he only lived 5 years. He was 25 when he got there. He died at 30, 5 years later. So one story about Charles that his children and grandchildren loved to tell was called Grandfather Law's Stint. Okay, so during Indian troubles, Springville built a protection fort type wall, 10 feet high and 4 feet wide on top. And everybody had to work on this wall. They were assigned to work on this wall. But many loafed on the job. Charles went to the bishop, the foreman, and asked for his stint, the day's assigned work. The bishop, thinking that he was complaining, gave him an oversized portion. Charles finished it by mid-afternoon and went home. Then the complaints came in. How come Charles got to go home? The bishop offered the same stint to others. The next day, a man took it and was still working when everyone else quit, unable to finish. After that, no one wanted a stint alongside Brother Law. Another memory of Charles was that he was very strict but reasonable. His word was law in the family. He never haggled. He made expectations clear and expected obedience. When he caught his children playing in a pollywog pond, he forbade it. Later, he caught 3 in the water. He punished the 2 older ones who knew better, but let the youngest, Francis, go untouched. Keep in mind that these children of his, they're just 4 and under, because Charles only lived 5 years after getting married to the sisters. So he only has children that are 4 and under. Then Charles gets tuberculosis. He actually went out to California looking for work. He had heard that you could make a lot of money soling shoes for the people that were the gold miners. And he went out there looking for work, and he was supposed to come back fairly quickly, which he wasn't able to do. And he got tuberculosis and came back pretty sick and died within the next year. But anyway, this account here says his lungs failed him in the end. He pushed on, stopping to catch his breath until he could go no further. Charles died in September 1862, just 5 years after arriving in Utah, leaving his wives and very young children behind. After his death, the 3 sisters petitioned for a divorce from him. They wanted their sealings canceled, freeing them to remarry. They continued living together in harmony and love, the three sisters, for a time, sharing the adobe home and the work. Hannah taught school. Elizabeth and Emma sewed. They made hats. They had learned how to do that in England. When one was rushed, the others helped. The children of one wife were taught to obey the others as if they were their mother. There was a great love that existed between these sisters. Eventually, they all remarried and divided things up, which, see, is just a little bit ironic, right? It was all this sacrifice for this sealing, and then they just had the sealing canceled. And this is how the irony plays out. Okay, so, and why did they need to cancel that sealing? Because to get remarried again, the man who's marrying them wants to be sealed. So Hannah remarried, and this was not a polygamous marriage. And they were called to settle Paris, Idaho, which is by Bear Lake, which was a really harsh life. It had short growing seasons, and the winters are really harsh there. So basically, that was a really harsh life for Hannah to end up with. And I don't know that she really even saw her sisters after that, because it's a ways out. Maybe once a year, maybe not. I don't know. Elizabeth remarries into a plural marriage again. She again is the second wife. She's actually very happy in this marriage. But the first wife isn't. And eventually, over the years, the first wife divorces her husband because she's just so unhappy. So again, the whole thing just kind of falls apart. But Elizabeth was very happy, and she lived a long life. And she actually had kind of a prestigious calling. I think she was first counselor in the General Relief Society presidency. And she just had good callings in Springville. They were poor. She never had any money, but I think she enjoyed her life. And then there's just poor Emma. Okay, Emma remarries again, but I don't think she got a very good second husband either. Or that's what the family history says. And she always lived in poverty. And her children or grandchildren claim that, I guess it was the children, that they would have starved if it hadn't been for their mother's hard work, just getting food on the table to them. And she dies at 29. She was 14 when she got married, so she lived another 15 years, but she dies young. The sisters never returned to England. They lived out their days in Utah and Idaho, raising families, contributing to settlements, and carrying the memories of that first harsh winter in the wagon on the public square. And I am going to say, I think the sisters had a really good brother in England. That was their half-brother. But when he died, he made sure, and the only one left was Elizabeth, but he made sure Elizabeth got her inheritance, which she was very grateful for. Their story is not one of easy triumph. Rather, it's one of quiet, persistent survival. 3 young women who crossed an ocean and a continent for Zion, paid a steep price to stay together, and built lives from the ashes of paradise promised. Okay, what's next for Zion's Fire? I'll do some deep dives into topics and events from the Bocock sisters' story. Like one I think I'm going to do is that Thomas L. Kane, because that is a fascinating story that never gets told. So I want to do one on that one. He was the negotiator between Brigham Young, Buchanan, and Colonel Johnston. It's a fascinating story. Zion has many stories still to tell. See you on the trail.